Welcome back to another episode of the RAG Report podcast with me, Sean Anderson, bringing you a daily bulletin show all the way through lockdown, really to help the global recruitment industry learn from others. These are advisors, owners, investors, coaches, and anyone who's prepared to give up their time to support the global recruitment industry, both get through the pandemic, but also navigate this new digital world that we find ourselves in. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Beth Miller. Beth is the founder of Executive Velocity, who are a talent advisory and leadership organization helping SMEs and privately owned businesses in the US and abroad build talent pipelines, understand their leadership functions, and also scale and exit. Beth started life in the staffing sector, our very own recruitment space. And so she's got a really strong affinity and knowledge base in this space. And one thing that we talked about before the show was how she helps founders exit their businesses without having a long lock-in period. And I think right now with lockdown, everyone's reevaluating their organizations. What does that look like for them? I want to get under the bonnet of how recruitment owners can really benefit from Beth's knowledge and keep that long-term scale and exit vision in their mind. Before I do, let me mention our sponsor on a very similar topic. So Rise Recruitment Ventures are an investment business who also help recruitment companies scale and exit. These guys sold Liquid Personnel in 2016 for over 20 million and are now backing the next generation of recruitment owners to do the same. So if you're a new startup or an early stage recruitment business and due to COVID-19 might be interested in financial support, but also the support around building a brand that's set for scale, so with the foundations of a world-class recruitment brand, then you should reach out to John and Alex via www.riserv.co.uk. All right, back to the show. Beth, welcome to the RAG Report.
Well, thank you, Sean. I've been looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Yeah, likewise. And you're joining us from, I don't know if it's sunny Atlanta, Georgia. It's definitely not sunny in the UK right now.
It is sunny.
Yeah.
It's sunny today, yes.
My first question to everyone on the show has been, for the listeners, can you paint the picture? Just describe your life right now. What the hell's going on in your world?
Well, it's a lot different than if you'd asked me 3 months ago. Mm-hmm. We, here in the States, we're depending on where we are living, state to state. Here in Atlanta, I have a little more freedom than a number of other states. So, in fact, I had my first face-to-face meeting last week.
Wow.
In fact, I said to my client, I feel like a little kid going off to school for the first time.
Okay, yeah.
It's been so long. So I have spent, fortunately, a lot of my work is virtual. So I haven't had a huge change in the way that I operate, although I have missed those face-to-face meetings and my training. I do a lot of workshops, and those have all been put on pause. They've decided they don't want to do kind of the Zoom workshops. And we put it on pause. I've got a number that are going to start up in July.
Yeah. I bet. Let's go backwards then and tell us just overview of you and the business. Like, what do you actually do? I've given you an intro, but I'm never going to be able to do it justice.
Yeah. So Executive Velocity, we work with small, mid-sized companies. Generally, I look at companies from an employee size versus a revenue size. So generally, it's 30 employees, upwards of 300 to 500 employees. The companies generally have HR, but they don't have somebody that's looking at their talent in a strategic way and looking at it from a standpoint of who you have now and what does your organization need to look like in order to meet your future goals. And those might be very different. And so I help companies to evaluate their current leadership, their current organization, and try and match the people to the right positions. Oftentimes people are in a position that may not be the right position, especially smaller companies that have, elevated people into positions because they were a great recruiter. And all of a sudden, well, gosh, they should be the recruiting manager. Well, performance and potential are not equal. In fact,
And those jobs aren't actually that similar in some ways. Like I was that guy who was billing big money, and I think I did show potential of leadership. Like I was definitely the sort of person that gave time to others, and I used to be a school teacher before, so I probably
yes.
had a lot of that. But I remember when my bosses picked me up and said, "We want you to become a leader and a manager," and I was like, I found it really difficult, if I'm honest, because I was like, as a recruiter on big commissions, it was the first time in my life I was earning the money I'd imagined, and now they want me to split that and build other people. And it took me a long period to get my head around it and adjust, but then I did have that future foresight that I one day wanted to own a company. And I thought, if I just operate as a one-dimensional lone shark, then how am I ever going to build teams for myself? So I thought, well, I'll learn this skill set on their money, their brand, which for me worked. But that is definitely not, especially in recruitment, it's probably one of the most difficult moves you can make.
Recruiting and sales, which are basically the foundation of a staffing industry, right? It's recruiting and sales. And both of those, they're what I call subject matter experts that a leader decides, hey, we want to elevate them into a management position. And so often they're not prepared. That's oftentimes when I'm called in, is because there's some sort of gap related to that new leader that needs to be developed. And so one of the things that I work with companies on is really understanding what potential means versus performance, because really potential is a subset of performance. So high performers in general, only 1 out of 7 have the traits that are high potential traits. And a lot of companies get confused as to performance and potential. So I have that conversation. We really define what potential looks like in their organization. And part of that often will be identifying their core competencies that an organization has and needs from its employees, and the core leadership competencies that leaders need to have within that company.
It's such I think it's a really interesting space. Like my business, like just before lockdown, we were working with someone like you, who's been very, very experienced in growing marketing agencies, right? Mm-hmm. And we did that vision. Where does the business need to be in 3 years? And we looked at that leadership layer, and then it's incredible the gap of where you are now and where you need to be. And you're like, are the people we've already got the right people? Are they going to be new people? And it just creates such an emotional roller coaster of what the hell we're going to do, but so exciting as well. Like, without that, I've still got that in my head. Like, lockdown or not, like I've still got that leadership team in my head of where we're heading. Right. It's keeping me on the kind of straight and narrow right now. What you mentioned, you've got a history in the sector. So you worked in staffing originally, did you?
It was basically my second career. I started actually in finance with a Fortune 500 company, and left. I was in sales at the time. I went from finance to sales and left to work for a staffing firm.
Right.
And that's where I met my husband, who was selling as well, but in a different geography. And when we got married, we couldn't be competing. So he went off and started an accounting temporary services firm. I was in the IT sector. And he finally convinced me, because he was the entrepreneur. I'm not a big entrepreneur.
Right.
He convinced me to join him and start a IT consulting. So we started actually high up and did project work, and then we went downstream to staffing.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was back in the 90s that we did that work. Yeah.
So that'll set you in good stead to work with staffing businesses now, though, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Although, it's interesting. It's the industry has definitely changed, but the the core of it hasn't, right? It's all about people, all about people. What I find very interesting, and we made the same mistake when we had our firm, was we were great at finding people for our clients. But when it came to recruiting and identifying the right people for our team, we weren't so good at it.
I'm interrupting today's episode to bring you a message from our sponsor, Odro, the market's leading video interview platform. But today we're not talking about making video. We're talking about an industry-wide challenge they've put together to raise money for the Teenage Cancer Trust. And it's called the Active Recruiter Challenge. So coming up on the 10th of July, which is a Friday, they are challenging recruiters all over the world to run either a 10K or a half marathon, running from your homes and choosing your route up and down the country. So everyone's getting involved. I'm personally about to get involved. I've held back because I've had some injuries, but I'm about to do it. I know my business partner and my mates are getting involved. It's £25 each, and you can nominate your friends and get your whole business, all your recruitment team included. Choose whether you want to run a half marathon or a 10K. I fancy the half, but I'm not sure I'm fit enough, but let's see. And get involved by downloading the Strava app. So they've put together a very specific Strava group that you sign up to, and then you join the group with your friends, colleagues, and all the other recruiters out there. There's going to be a runner's pack with numbers and wristbands that will be sent out by the Odro team. And you can see all the information on Odro's blog for further details. It is as close as we can get to the real thing of meeting people, being together right now. And also it's for an amazing charity. So, you need to get started and do this, guys. I'm officially training. I hope you're going to be there too. All the information is going to be shared below this episode. So get involved. Back to the show.
What I find very interesting, and we made the same mistake when we had our firm, was we were great at finding people for our clients. But when it came to recruiting and identifying the right people for our team, we weren't so good at it.
Yeah, it's difficult. And I think the nature of recruitment, though, as well, is the backgrounds. You can't, unless you're looking for experienced people with track records in recruitment, which is a bit easier. But then sometimes you bring people with all sorts of habits. And, the one thing I found when hiring experienced people was they're really good at interviewing. They say all the right thing.
Right.
But when you're looking outside of the sector, it's almost, anyone can do it. I know people, I know a client who picked up a guy in a fish restaurant who was just, this Irish guy was leaving the fish restaurant and they thought he was great. Next day he joined the firm and now he's like £1 million biller in London. And you can't really, you can't say I want people from a specific background because they come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things that I work with, especially the smaller companies, because they don't have the brand that a larger firm does, and so they need to cast a wider net and look for those individuals that might be outside of the industry, but have those core competencies that are going to make them successful. The great leaders that I know are really good at that. I know one individual I've known for quite some time. He's built a huge ice cream empire here in the States. And he is amazing at being able to identify high potentials outside of his world.
Yeah.
And I really credit the growth of his company to that.
It's massive. So what I wanted to touch on with you in a bit more depth was that whole scale, exit. How do you get yourself in a position as a staffing recruitment firm to successfully walk away, which I think if most owners are honest with themselves, I'll say most because there's not always, the plan will be get to a certain size, certain scale and exit and sell. And I don't know, go and live on a beach somewhere or whatever. So firstly, like pre-lockdown, what would your advice be to anyone who's a mid-sized recruit, or even in their early days, if they're definitely long-term thinking, that's the plan for them?
Right. I think overall, my advice has been to make yourself replaceable.
Okay.
And that's all about, building a strong leadership team where you aren't working 24/7. Many of the smaller staffing companies, the owner is still in operational mode. They're working in the business, not on the business, and they're wearing multiple hats. They're not looking towards the future per se. They're looking at what the end of this year is going to bring.
Yeah.
For revenue and profit, for instance. So it's how do you make yourself replaceable? There was a firm I worked with. This was probably about 10 years ago, and the owner did an excellent job of that. He realized that he wanted to be able to take a lot more vacations with his family, and he had become a grandfather too. So he wanted to have those family vacations. But the way his company was running, he wouldn't be able to do that.
No.
So he started being very purposeful about the individuals that he brought on his team, and identified the vice president of sales as his potential successor. And 3 years later, that individual was president, and the owner was able to get his work week down to 1 day a week.
Sounds like the dream.
It is, but it takes a lot of work. You have to start 3 to 5 years ahead of the goal of.
So is that would you say? I always think thinking further than 3 years is really difficult. Like personally, I think 1 year. 1 year is really easy to see. Well, not easy, but you can visualize 1 year. I mean, I got married a year ago, and I feel like it's been a blink of an eye, right?
Yeah.
Crazy first year getting married in lockdown. Best year, definitely. But 3 years, I can see it. I can feel it. 5 years just feels a bit, I don't know, a little bit, you're making stuff up after 3, in my head a little bit.
Yeah, and you are, but you've got to put a stake in the ground, right? And the issue is if you want to create that leadership team, you don't want to be hiring the president and training them and getting them up to speed over the next year, because that individual, they don't have the history.
No,
they don't have that culture that they understand the company has. I mean, it'll take some time for them to really understand what drives the culture. Ideally, especially again in those small, mid-sized companies, you want to identify and develop somebody from within. A great example, last year I was working with a smaller firm. Probably they were on the small, probably 30 employees, 40 employees. And the woman that owned the company, she had decided she wanted to retire. She was in her early 60s, and but she had not spent any time developing a leadership pipeline. So there was nobody on her team that was prepared, even close to prepared. There was nobody with potential. Even if you had 3 or 4 years to develop somebody, there was nobody there. So she ended up hiring somebody from the industry to come in, and it was a disaster.
Really?
An absolute disaster. And she had used a recruiter, professional recruiter. She actually knew this guy, and she had had experiences with him in the industry, but there were things that she neglected to do, and she didn't take the time up front to kind of transition. She had a house on the beach, and she's like, okay, got him. I'm going to head. And right, and there were no metrics to keep in check with him as he transitioned. and it was a complete disaster. So I find that the success of transitioning leadership takes time. It's not about hiring that person outside. Now, if you've got a large organization where you need some sort of specific expertise that's not generic leadership, that may be where you want to hire somebody. Like there's a company I'm working with in Florida. They realize that they're doing some succession planning. They've identified what their organization needs to look like 3 years from now. And one of the positions that's missing is a CIO. Mm-hmm. They've got technology folks that are director levels, but they're not going to be ready in 3 years. So they need to bring somebody on, and one of the things that person needs to be doing is developing the people below from a succession planning standpoint that will be prepared to take that guy's position when he retires.
Yeah.
So it's looking at that pipeline and identifying who are those people that have potential, and what are the development plans for those people.
One of the things about the nature of recruitment owners, though, is they're, and I hope people listening aren't going to hate me for this, but I'm probably not that far away. It's quite ego driven. Typically, they're quite, they've been really successful salespeople, and most owners I've talked to, they'll still say, I've got the best relationships with clients in the business, and if things need to get done, I'll drive it through, and that is where I always think. This kind of my biggest fear of myself, if I'm brutally honest, is that am I going to struggle to, one, I've built this brand which is synonymous with our business, but two, can I really let go? Can I give other people the rate? And that's what I've got to work on. I really want to do that. Have you seen that before, where the recruitment owner is they say they want to exit, but their behaviors are completely
yes, and it's not just with the recruiting industry. A lot of it is, my belief is that your persona, and your identity, it revolves around your company, whether it be a recruiting company or a manufacturing company, whatever. If you have built the business and watched it grow, much of your time and energy over the last how many years has been with that company.
Yeah. And
so I spend a lot of time, especially with older leaders, owners of companies, so in their late 50s, getting them to start thinking about, what does life look like after the sale of your company? How are you going to have a purpose-driven life? Because your purpose before was your company. Now what's it going to be?
Yeah, the guys from Rise, the sponsors of our show, I had a similar chat in October, November last year, and they talked about really quite almost being a little bit depressed when they sold. Like these guys were mid-30s, I think, made over 10 million each, and what do you don't even know what to do with that kind of money, especially, but also they were so ingrained in a business that they'd stepped back, but still their whole lives were associated. And then when they stepped away, they were completely away, and they weren't going back in, they were out. So it was like, I think they took a bit of time to get used to that. And and then they said, there's always a second horizon. That's why they've started a new business, because they're not done yet. And I think depending on your age, there's a lot of recruitment owners in their 30s and 40s that have got really substantial companies that are turning over millions, and they might sell in before they're 40 or before they're 45. Right. I know. Are you really ready at that point in your life to sit and play golf every day or whatever? I mean, you're not, are you?
No. I mean, we sold our business back in 2002, and we don't have kids, and so we did take some time to travel, but what I realized was, there was only so much travel. There was only so much volunteer. I did do a lot of volunteer work, thinking that I was going to be retired. And then I got bored really quickly. And one of the things that I realized about myself was that I love to learn, and I need to have my mind challenged. So I was really fortunate at that point to find Vistage. And I'm not sure if you or your listeners know Vistage, but it's a CEO membership organization.
Right.
It's actually international. There are chapters, I know, in the UK and Australia.
Okay.
You have listeners there. It's a way where business owners, privately held for the most part, come together on a monthly basis.
Right.
And chairs like myself would facilitate the meeting. And it was a safe place for leaders to get advice. So it was like an advisory board or a think tank. But one of the things that it provided me was that I was always learning from these folks. And I also provided coaching. So that's how I got involved with coaching was through Vistage.
Right.
Yeah. And then the third component for Vistage is a speaker that comes in. So I was constantly learning. And then when I stepped away from Vistage last year, that was a big hole for me. But I realized from going through selling the business back in 2002 that I needed to fill that. And so I've been really purposeful about getting education, seminars and webinars and things like that feed that for me.
A message from our final sponsor, Vincere. Vincere, if you don't know, is the all-in-one CRM ATS platform for recruitment and staffing businesses globally. Now, I first heard about Vincere, it feels like it was about a year or so ago. And this business came out of nowhere from speaking to recruitment agencies. And I've always asked them what CRM they use when dealing with them from a Hoxo perspective. The same players usually used to come up, but this word Vincere kept coming up, and I was like, okay, I've heard this 2, 3, 4, 5 times. It must be an interesting brand. And now I hear Vincere almost as much as any other brand out there. So I did my research, and what I love about Vincere is they're looking to partner and invest in the same types of organizations that Hoxo do, which is the future high growth recruitment business, what I call progressive owners. These guys are putting a product out there to level the playing field and help smaller businesses and those growing to edge over their competition. It's proven to be a disruptor in the space. More and more people are using this software globally. They recently broke into the G2 Crowd Momentum Grid as the market leader on stellar reviews from users. So the recruiters that are using Vincere are raving about it. They've got 5 global offices, headquartered in Vietnam. So if you've got an office anywhere in the world, they've got this follow the sun methodology. So the support is absolutely top notch. And also by sponsoring the RAG, they're giving a unique offer to our listeners. So if you're listening and you want to get involved, go to Vincere, vincere.io/RAG, where they're going to be offering you a unique exclusive deal because you listen to the RAG podcast. Get in touch today. In terms of the current situation, so I completely agree with everything you've said on the front of, the replacing yourself and all that. Moving forward, we're in a world now where, I don't know about you in the States, but I know for a fact the community that I serve have made it clear on numerous occasions. Some of the people that probably were thinking about building 200-man businesses or person businesses, sorry, are now thinking about a different strategy. So they're starting to. I mean, I lead a branding marketing business, and I've been saying for 3 years that I personally believe that the future of our sector of the recruitment space will have a huge branding tech automation element to it. I think I'm not convinced recruiters will be replaced by robots, but I am convinced that brands that rely pure on sheer people power to pick up the phone all day will lose out when others adopt modern techniques.
Yeah.
But it feels like that what I've been saying has all been merged into one, and everyone's it's on the end of everyone's tongue now, because we're forced into this digital world. No one's meeting anybody, like you say. It's rare. Webinars are everywhere. One of my clients we've had over 5,000 attendees to webinars in the last 6-7 weeks. So
Wow.
they've managed to build a really good community that other recruitment businesses haven't done. But when it comes to the owner and their long-term plans, again, I think there's a lot that are reevaluating. What have you worked with anyone recently, or have you got any advice on how people can almost see through this pandemic to where they need to be? Because it will end, in my opinion. It's not going to last forever.
Hopefully not. Yes. I actually have a client here in Atlanta, and a lot of discussions recently have been around, what do I need to be doing differently? And this is the time to make shifts in the business. And the discussion around, the people aspect of the industry. And, one of the things he's doing is he's making some shifts around technology, and some really exciting things that he's been working on that actually started pre-COVID. He had these ideas, but now he's actually putting them into action. They were sitting there as an idea in his parking lot, but this has driven him to take action on those. So yeah, the companies that are have leaders who are caring for themselves from a standpoint of energy and emotion are the ones that are able to be led through and out of this COVID in a more healthy way. The ones that are stuck in the same model, they're not going to survive. They just aren't. I talked to a woman who's got a smaller firm, has lost probably 35% of her revenue, and she's exhausted. I recommended that, I don't even know if she can sell the business at this point, but if she can, it may be worth it, because she doesn't have the energy to lead and move forward.
I really feel for those people that were close to it. You're the guys that were, if you're early on in your journey, you're nimble, you're like me, for example. I'm 3 years in, I've got a long-term exit plan, but it's a blip, in my opinion.
Right.
I'm happy to elongate a couple more years. It's fine. But if you're 10 or 15 years in the game, 20 years in the game, you had a sale time of, I don't know, summer 2020, and you've now lost 35 to 50% of revenue, you've put your team on furlough or whatever. How do you bring yourself back from that? How do you cope? Because surely you're constantly just thinking, what if? What if?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and part of that is that mental toughness that some of us have and some of us don't. Those that don't, either you pull up your bootstraps, as we say, and soldier on, or you need to figure out your exit quickly. The people that I work with, like the woman I shared with you, who's I recommended that she probably sell. I'm not even working with her. She reached out to me, and it was almost like she needed a therapist to talk to for 30 minutes. But as I heard her talk, I knew that I couldn't help her.
Yeah.
She was too far down the path. This was something that had been going on pre-COVID. She had lost energy pre-COVID, and now this kind of put her over the edge.
Yeah.
And so I personally, when I look to work with business owners, I'm looking for those that have that energy That doesn't mean that they don't have hiccups. And those are the times that I help get them through those,
Mm-hmm.
is helping them to think about situations differently by asking questions that they probably have never asked themselves before, and helping them set themselves up for the future. My role, even though, especially if I'm working in a staffing company, yeah, I have the experience and knowledge of the industry, but it's the leader's job to come up with the solution. It's my job to ask the questions and challenge their self-limiting beliefs to help them get to that solution.
Right. Makes sense. So it is really about looking deep into yourself and thinking, do I
Yes.
have the fight for this?
Exactly.
Do I have the fight for this?
Yeah.
I know someone who, at the beginning of lockdown, different industry, but they lost I think 85% of their revenue in a week. And I was chatting to him and he said, I don't want to fight it. He said, so he's scaled it right down. He's basically like a freelancer now, and he seems quite happy. Like, he wasn't enjoying it pre-COVID when it was at a big size. So he was like, it's not. But he was pretty quick to identify that he wasn't in the fight, and I think that I think that was a good thing, because it kind of freed him up of the burden. Whereas if you know deep down you've not got the fight, but you're trying to show you do for other people, that must be it must feel like you're running in quicksand.
And that was my advice to her as well, was, if you don't have the energy, the people around you are going to know it.
Yeah.
They're just going to know it. And they look to you for their leadership, and you're not at a point in your life that you can lead them forward.
So if you can sell, look at it. If you can't, then what are your options there?
Well, and then her option is, how does she set up her company where it's as nimble and cost efficient as possible. So, she was thinking, okay, I've got some office space. The lease is running out in 6 months. I'm not going to re-up. We're going to work from home. We've been working from home anyways for the last 3 months, and it's worked fine. So, how does she reorganize to a point where she's not losing money?
It's crazy. It's exactly the same conversation I had with my contact, and I do feel for those people. But the ones that have got the energy, I guess, what's your advice to them then? Just keep the vision, just push it out maybe a bit longer, give yourself the grace of a few more years.
Right, exactly. And most of them are the ones that I've spoken to, 9 times out of 10, they realize that this is the rebuilding year. Just like back in 08, 09, it's a rebuilding year. And if they had plans to sell in the next couple of years, well, that's going to be a few years out. Or they just have to readjust their expectations for the sale.
But the final thing then, we've got a few minutes, but in order to sell, whenever it is, whether it's 3, 5, 10, 15 years, the key components that you need to consider are that you've replaced yourself from almost all operation.
Exactly.
Including that CEO sign off. You need somebody else who's doing that.
Yes.
At that point. And what would you be doing in that? What would you be your role before you exit? What would be the things you would be responsible for at that point?
So it's in the case of this one gentleman I was talking about, he got to the point where there were only major financial decisions. If they were going to buy some significant capital equipment or something like that he would get involved with the decision. But all the hiring, he didn't know who was coming and going from the organization. He had set up a reporting mechanism, so he knew how things were going, and unless they went sideways, he wasn't going to step in and and talked with the president about it, because they had been working long enough together that he knew and had the confidence and trust in that individual that things were going to be fine. And ultimately, what happened was he was able to sell the business. He had 2 cash offers, all cash, and he had no employment contract. So he literally could walk away. I mean, that's like
it's the
unbelievable.
Dream. It's the dream.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, you got me thinking about my day on the beach in the future, but it's going to be a long time for now. But look, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And I'm sure the listeners have enjoyed the show, and your words of they're actually really, really simple stuff, but stuff that you forget. And at times like this, you need to hear. So if anyone wanted to reach out and ask you, to help them or just for advice, maybe they need 30 minutes of a psychology therapy session. Are you interested in that?
So couple things. One is during these challenging times, I am offering 30-minute pro bono coaching.
Great.
So they can reach me through LinkedIn, which is Beth Armknecht Miller, which is ARMKNECHT Miller. I'm the only one.
We'll make sure you're tagged in this all as well. So
yeah. And then my website, which is executive-velocity.com.
Brilliant. All right. Well, look, I'm sure people will take you up on that. Guys, that's it for another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I know you've got your long-term visions. We've all got our short-term tactical things to think about, but it's still important, even at times like this, to pull your head out of the water. Look above the business rather than inside the business, and think about the future, because we've all got the future. We just need to be a bit more patient than probably we were before. In the meantime, don't forget, I don't ask for you guys to pay me for this show. I do ask you to do one thing, which is share the show. So share with another recruitment owner. If you're in a network, you've got friends who own businesses, please pass this on, because people like Beth are giving up their time, and this information is going to help us all come through the pandemic together. I'll be back again tomorrow with more insights from around the world. In the meantime, you stay safe, and I'll see you soon.